Okay, so welcome everybody. For those that are here with us, those that are online, those who are going to watch later on. This week's parsha is actually Vayera, and we're going to start in Exodus chapter 6, and it goes 6:2 through chapter 9, verse 25. But before we get into this parsha, one of the things I thought about was the song, and most of you who've been with us a while remember this song, Moses and Me. If you don't know that, I will actually link it, and you can go to the video and you go to the description box. I'll link it up there so that way you can watch it by 8th day. But that's a really cool video about Moses and me, that we all have a little bit of Moses in us. So yeah, well, yeah, and I'm not going to mention her name because she probably doesn't want to, but we do have a friend who just lost her mom too, so we do have some prayer requests that we're sending out to the group too. So, and don't forget Dawn's brother. So this week's parsha, we are starting in Exodus chapter 6, verse 2. This week is the 14th parsha, or portion of the year. And so before we get into it, the 14th Hebrew letter of the alphabet is the letter Nun. And when we think about the letter Nun, Nun has the value, because remember in Hebrew, letters have values as well as sounds. And the value of the Nun is the value of the Nun is 50. The sound it makes is like an N sound. But it also has a form meaning, which means a nun is a seat or an air, or your line continuing. So in this parsha, portion, so it's all about the plagues of Egypt, and so it's also about his line or his air continuing on. And so Yah reveals himself to Moses or Moshe through these plagues, and we're going to go through these plagues in detail, as they're focusing on demolishing the different gods of Egypt, but also how do we apply this scripture to our lives? And we're going to see how they symbolize how we're to demolish the idols and things in our life and to come out of Egypt. So it starts by Yah revealing himself to Moshe. And, remember in last week's parsha, which was called Shemot, names, we didn't really touch on a lot about the pronunciation of the name, but, how important it is, that it is Yah's name. So I'm going to start in Exodus chapter 6, verse 2. 6 and 2. And Elohim spoke to Moshe, and he said to him, I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I appeared to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov as El Shaddai, although I did not make myself known to them by my name, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Also with them I established my covenant to give them the land of Canaan, the land where they wandered about, and they lived as foreigners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the people of Israel, whom the Egyptians are keeping in slavery, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore, say to the people of Israel, I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I will free you from forced labor of the Egyptians, rescue you from their oppression, and redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Okay, so I want to stop right here, first of all. So when looking at this opening of the parsha, we get in 6 and 2 that he says, my name was not known to the patriarchs prior to this time. Okay. So, and he calls himself Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. But if we go back to Genesis, let's go back, because remember, if you're looking at an English version of the Bible, every time you see the capital L-O-R-D, that is the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Okay.
It says Lord.
Yeah, when it says, yep, Lord. Yeah. So In Genesis 15 and verse 7, what's wrong with my, I don't know what's wrong with it. Just a second. That's weird. I got something going on weird with my Bible. Sorry.
What was that place of Ur and Chaldees? Do they
Mesopotamia.
Mesopotamia?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that was
Iraq. In Iraq.
Iraq.
Okay, so in Genesis 15 and verse 8, it says, then he said to him, I am Yud-Heh-Vah-Peh. But wait a second, we just read in Exodus, he said, I didn't make myself known to them by that name. But yet we see in Genesis, he's called by that name, who brought you out of the Ur of Kasdim to give you this land as your possession. Okay, so we do see him listed there. If we go over to, as Yud-Heh-Vah-Peh, we go over to chapter 28. Sorry. Yeah, he's talking to Abraham there. Okay, wait a second. And Genesis 28. There's something weird going on with my Bible works, and it's not letting me do that. Okay, Genesis 28 and verse 13. Then suddenly Yah said, was standing there next to him, and he said, I am Yud-Heh-Vah-Peh, the Elohim of Abraham, your father, and the Elohim of Yitzhak. The land on which you're lying, I will give to you and to your descendants. So again, we've got both of those talking about him being called Yud-Heh-Vah-Peh. But when we go look at Exodus 6, he says, I appeared to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov as El Shaddai, but by name, Yud-Heh-Vah-Peh, I didn't make known to him. But we clearly see it says Yud-Heh-Vah-Peh was talking to him. And so does that mean they didn't know his name? You wanted to go and say something?
Well,
wait a minute. Go back here. Sorry, I gotta.
One thing I wanted to say, when you go back to Genesis 15, and Lice read verse 7. If you look right above that, verse 6, it says, and he, which is talking about Abraham, believed in Yud-Heh-Vah-Peh, and it was counted to him as righteousness. So it just shows you, and going down to the bottom, it talks about that word. He believed in Yud-Heh-Vah. He believed in the word. Well, who is the word? Yahweh. Yeshua, Jesus. Yeshua is the word. He believed in a Messiah that was going to come later on, and it was counted to him as being righteous. So Abraham, even way back then, was a righteous man. Why? Because he believed in the word of Yud-Heh-Vah-Peh by faith, and he was considered righteous.
Okay, so what are we saying here? Did did the children of Israel not know his name? But clearly it says, but even before he said he spoke to Abraham and he was speaking, he says, I called myself Yud-Heh-Vah-Peh, I called you out. Yeah, but wait a minute, but in Exodus we got where Yah says, I didn't make myself known to him by that name. Right. So, one of the things that's written, one of the commentators, actually Rashi, wrote that it's not written here that this is what Rashi writes. It's not written here, my name I did not make known to them, but rather by my name I was not known to them. Meaning, in Hebrew, names have meanings. Like Reuben. Reuben means a son. Yehuda means praise, to Yahweh. So we think about, they mean something. And so when we look here, even Rashi is saying that Yah was saying that by his name, Yud-Heh-Vah-Peh, he didn't make himself known to them. And so in this parsha, we've got, not only the revelation in the name, but it's saying by those attributes because El Shaddai means, it's often translated as God Almighty, but El being God, Shaddai Shad, meaning breast or enough, because it's basically the one who's giving you or filling you enough. And so he is the sufficient one. He's the one who provides enough for you. That's El Shaddai. And so in this parsha, we see this is the first time he's saying that Yud He Vav He, I'm going to make known to you what Yud He Vav He is. And there's no missing who or what he is capable of what his attributes are by his name. Because when we look at the name Yud He Vav He, okay, Yud He Vav He, that Hebrew letters, actually are coming from the verb to be, okay? So when we think about, the word to be, we think about he was Haya. Haya is spelled, the door's not shut. Hey, Vav, hey. And then if we're saying it in present tense, he is, we would say Hove. Hove is hey, Vav, hey. Okay. And when we'd say in the future tense, he will be, it's Yeh. Okay. So it's Yud, hey, Yud, hey. So when you think about the name Yud, hey, Vav, hey, we're basically getting the attributes he was, he is, and he will be. Yes. Mm-hmm. The I am is Ehyeh. It's a form of that. Yeah.
The Israelites, when they was in Egypt, that's what they used.
Those attributes, yeah, because this is what we're going through. When you look at his name, it's coming from that, where it says I am that I am, or that's basically the conjugated forms of this verb, Haya, Hove, and Yeh.
And they would have known.
And they would have known that
They
because
would
they
have known.
spoke Hebrew. So when you think about what this is saying, then what does that mean? If his name is Yud He Vav He, and that means it's coming from the verb he was, he is, and he is to or will be, that means he's outside of the laws of nature that we have.
Is that where God is in the past, in the present, and in the future?
Yes, he is not working within our laws of nature.
No, he's not.
Yeah, so he can do those miracles and perform those miracles, and that's what he's saying to them here is because what are we doing? We're getting ready to see these plagues, and these are working outside of the laws of nature.
Is that part of why that you remember when Abraham was taking Isaac to be sacrificed? It said that he looked afar off
In the future,
and
he
saw the place.
Yeah.
Well, that was a futuristic. He was seeing actually Yeshua was his crucifixion.
Yeah.
He let him see it. God let him see that.
And so,
That was good.
Yeah. So when we think about his name, there's so much within his name that he's going to reveal in this portion. He's going to show to not only the children of Israel, but to the Egyptians and everybody who he is, because there are going to be things that, they think, oh, well, this is, we can get our magicians to replicate it, but there comes a point when they can't. And that these miracles, like I said, go against nature. He's showing that he is the creator of the universe and that he didn't need to follow the laws of science and nature. He's outside of them. He can be everywhere. So with that, that got me to thinking about, sometimes, especially since I'm putting these on YouTube, what title to put with these teachings or what pictures to put. So when you see the picture that I put on the teaching, it's, it made me think of the movie, I watched as a kid, The Wizard of Oz. And so I thought, wait a minute, Yah is going to display his wondrous power or wonders for all to see in this portion. And so, like I said, when you see this on the video list, I also put the wondrous wonders of Yah. And what did they say in The Wizard of Oz? Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Well, we're going to see lice and frogs and blood. Oh my. So I put that in there, but yeah.
You read Caleb's son.
Basically, you said that.
Oh.
His name, that most of them know him as Polio.
Yeah, he was yeah.
And he said, out of the realm of every.
She's just talking about how, yeah.
This realm, you know, we could talk to him.
She's just talking about his name and how, you know, even she was listening to a rabbi, Chaim Richmond, from the Temple Institute, talking about how, you know, he was outside, you know, with his name being that he's outside of time and that he's revealing himself too. So, okay. So, you know, with this, he's making himself known to the children of Israel and to Egypt. But the question is, are we known to him? Because today, you know, there are so many people who loosely say words like, oh, well, he knows my heart. Oh, he knows me. But basically, what are they doing? You know, they're expressing a kind of excuse to being able to live the way that they're living without really having to walk in his ways. Well, oh, he really knows what I intend, you know, and it's basically an excuse. You know, many will say that they know him, but do they really?
Well, what was they say, Lord, Lord.
Mm-hmm. In Matthew 5, yep.
But he says, I never knew you.
Yep. Yeah, and they even did what? Yeah, they did. It says you did wonders in my name. They did wonders. They were casting out devils. They were, you know, so if you're doing
well, even Pharaoh, you know,
yep.
people they were making snakes.
Yep, they're doing that too.
They could do, you know.
So, you know, this, you know, got me to thinking about a couple of scriptures. So let's go to Nahum. That's probably a prophet you haven't gone to in a lot.
Yeah, Lord.
And there is something going on with my Bible works. It is not letting me pull up the verses. It's not that. It's not the plug. It's something going on with my computer.
There it is. No, 774.
Okay, so y'all gonna have to look it up because it's not letting me pull up anything. I can't search for any scripture.
727.
Okay, wait a minute. Here it is. Okay, so Nahum chapter 1 and verse 7. Okay. It says, Yah is good, a stronghold in times of trouble. He takes care of those who take refuge in him. Okay, that's the way one version translates it. And another in the King James says, the Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows them and that trust in him. Okay, so when we look at that, you know, actually that part is better translation, that he knows them that trust in him. And so, you know, or part of it, he knows them. That, you know, that word trust there is actually hasa, which is to put their trust or to hope in him, but it's also to seek refuge. Well, if you're seeking refuge in something, then you're in that. Okay, so if you're in it, then you're in the word, you're there. Also, 1 John, let's go over to the Hadashah, 1 John chapter 2.
If we're seeking refuge, we're making sure we know who we're seeking refuge.
Yeah, we're seeking. Yep, we know who we're seeking. So 1 John chapter 2. And I'm going to go down to verse 3.
These pages are so thin.
Okay, 1 John 2 and 3. And this way, we can be sure we know him is if we are obeying his commands. Anyone who says, I know him, but isn't obeying his commands is a liar and the truth is not in him. But if someone keeps doing what he says, then truly the love of God has been brought to its goal in him. That is how we are sure that we are united with him. Okay. And so
That's good.
again, he's revealing himself, but the bigger question is, does he know us? And, and even you remember in John, in chapter 10, you can jot this one down, when he's talking about the shepherds, it says he says, the sheep hears my voice and they follow me. I know them and they follow me. So that's something, think about. Not just, does he reveal himself? Because even Hasatan and the fallen angels know him. You know what I'm saying? So you can't just say, oh, I know him or I believe in him, because even they believe in him. So, okay, so let's go back to the Parsha. We're in Exodus chapter 6. And I'm going to go back to verse 6 is where I want to start. Okay. Okay, so Exodus chapter 6, and I'm going to start in verse 6. Everybody get there. Okay, so, sorry, I got to slide mine up now. Therefore, say to the people of Israel, I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I will free you from the forced labor of the Egyptians, rescue you from their oppression, and redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. I will take you as my people. I will be your Elohim. Then you will know that I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim, who has freed you from the forced labor of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land which I swore to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. I will give it to you as an inheritance. I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Okay, so when I look at those verses, did you see something that was repeated and stuck out? What? I will, yeah. There's that repeated phrase of I will. And when we think about the first I wills, actually parallel the cups of wine that's you take at Pesach or Passover. And, those 4 I wills are the ones that are recounted during the retelling or the Haggadah at the Seder. And so, when you look at those, what they're saying is, okay, wait a second, let me go back up. He says, I will bring you out from under the Egyptians. I will free you. I will redeem you. I will take you to be a people. Okay. So when we look at all those, those are the ones that he's repeating at the Seder. And then what's interesting also at the Seder, the 5th I will is basically a picture of the brides accepting or acknowledging Yah as her husband and king. And then when we look at the 6th and the 7th I will, the 6th and the 7th one are talking about bringing them back into the land and giving our inheritance. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he does say I am. Mm-hmm. Or 4 times. Actually, he said it. Yeah, he says it. Yeah, in verse 2, he says I am. In verse 6, 7, and 8, he says I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. When you're saying it said 2, that's said 4 times. Well, 4 is the dalet or the door in Hebrew. And, we think about John 10. What does Yeshua say? Yeshua says, I am the door for the sheep. I am the entrance or the gate. That's in Hebrew, the door. So Yeshua is the door. He's the one that's showing us the way back to the flock of the Father. Yeah. He's showing those aspects of being Haya, Hove, and Yikye. And 4 also, we think about, 4 is, think about the 4 corners of the earth. The number 4 is also associated with division and separation, because what happened to the children of Israel? They were scattered or divided. And what do we see here? He's saying I am 4 times. He's displaying I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh 4 times. Well, what's he going to do? He's going to put a division or a separation between the children of Israel and the Egyptians. Yeah, he's going to, yeah, he's going to confirm his covenant. Well, because you think about if we, you know, he reminds them of that promise of the covenant. If we go back to Genesis 15, and this is the promise that he gives to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15 and verse 13. It says, and Yah said to Avram, know this for certain, your descendants will be foreigners in a land that is not theirs. They will be slaves and held in oppression there 400 years. But I will also judge that nation, the one that makes them slaves. Afterwards, they will leave with their many possessions. As for you, you will join your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. And only during the fourth generation will your descendants come back here, because only then will the Emory be ripe for punishment. And so, you know, Yah actually told Abraham that his, you know, think about how just being told your descendants are going to be so numerous, but they're going to be strangers in the land, and they're basically going to serve another nation for 400 years. And, you know, so that's sort of a sad prophecy to think about. Yeah, to know that iteration, yeah. How would you feel? But he's given the promise that yes, they are going to return. So, and that is, yes. Yeah, she's just saying that Yah's, it's amazing how Yah would just tell Abraham this, and that he's given him the future, but yet, you know, you think about how long they were having to spend that time there. So they knew it was coming. Yeah. And you think about too, like, in Exodus and Shemot, Yah is telling Moshe, this is why the redemption is taking place now. It is because of the promise that was given back to Abraham, that they were going to be strangers. And he said, they're going to be in this land that, was not theirs. And when we look at the 400 years, because there is a discrepancy amongst the verses, and that's another teaching I will do and put out there, that is, the 400 years actually starts from Yitzhak's birth. And like I said, I'll go through the number of years in Egypt, because really they weren't in 400 years in Egypt. But that being said, that I'll put that other teaching on there. So yeah, he was just saying that, for the land that they were going to inherit, they did need to have the numbers and had to multiply, and that they were greatly blessed while they were in Egypt.
I don't think I'll ever get sick of making crispy rice in the waffle maker. I decided to make it.
People saw that. I mean, people saw that. Then you go on to what has he spoken to us now in this generation?
Yeah, she was just saying, we think about, what Yah spoke. What did he speak to us, years and years ago? And then we think about, has it come to pass here? As we, do we see that happening yet? So, and then now we think about how many years ago that Yah spoke to Yochanan, the book of Revelation, and how many years that has gone past, 2,000 years before we're still waiting on that to happen. So yeah, we're still waiting on that to happen. So like I said, I will go through, that's a whole teaching in and of itself. I don't want to do that here. I don't want to spend that much time in that, but because there are, one verse says 400, there's another one that says 430, but then when you start adding up the numbers, it doesn't add up to be 400 or 430. So I was just, I'll go through that in a different one. But something to think about here is that the promise that he was given Abraham is we know that through sin, we become estranged or strangers in a land. We're away from him. And just like he was, telling Abraham that your descendants are going to be so numerous, but they're going to be strangers in a land. They're going to be like away from me. That's part when they were estranged from the land, when they were exiled, it was because they had sinned. And because of sin, we become enslaved. We become enslaved to sin. And so we can see that not only is this talking about, this happened in the past, but it's also a picture of us, how we basically exile ourselves or sin and we become estranged from him. And then we become enslaved to that sin. And that he's trying to show us through this portion that, yes, we become slaves to sin, and the slavery we'll see actually becomes worse, and we become oppressed and we become afflicted. But there is a promise there, that just like the promise that he gave to Abraham. And the verses that I read in Genesis 15, 13 through 14, what's interesting is if we look at what he said there, he says, okay, well, you're going to be a stranger. You're going to be in a land that's not yours. You're going to be enslaved, and then you're going to be oppressed and afflicted. Those four things would happen. But when we look at in Exodus 6, when we were talking about, we started in verse 6 and we talked about the I wills. The I wills are actually these four things that he says that they were going to happen to them. Stranger, they were going to be in a land that's not their own. They're going to be enslaved and they're going to be oppressed and afflicted. That he's promising them in Exodus 6 that he's going to do the same thing, but it's going to be in the reverse order. He says, I'm going to take you for my people and I'm going to be your God. Well, you were a stranger. Now you're not a stranger anymore. And then the second thing that would happen was they were going to be in a land not yours. Well, he says, well, I'm going to bring you back to the land and give it to you. And then he said, you were a slave. Well, in Exodus, he says, well, I'm going to redeem you and I'm going to deliver you. So you're not enslaved anymore. And then the fourth one was being oppressed and afflicted. Well, he's going to free you. So those I wills are in the reverse order of the promises that were going to come against them. Yeah. So he's actually releasing those. Mm-hmm.
Is coming back in, but yet we're not back in the land.
Yeah, she was just saying that here we are. There's a lot of us that are coming back to this, and yet we're still not in the land. Yeah, we're waiting. Okay, Exodus 6 and 9. And Moshe said to this people of Israel, but they wouldn't listen to him because they were so discouraged and their slavery was so cruel. Okay, that's the way the complete works it. I'm going to read it in the King James. The King James says, and Moshe spoke unto the children of Israel, but they hearkened not unto Moses for anguish of spirit and for cruel bondage. Okay, and so when we look at that, this is pointing out the children of Israel didn't listen to Moshe. And, the different versions there, said that they had this shortness of spirit, and in the Hebrew, it's actually kotzer ruach, which is a short spirit. Okay. And then it also says that their bondage was cruel. Well, in Hebrew, it's avodah kashe, which is work was hard. Okay. And so, or hard slavery. So when you think about what was happening, it's the most interesting that they didn't listen to him. Well, they didn't hear and obey Moses because their spirit was short. Okay. So what does that really mean? Your spirit's short. Does that mean my spirit just goes away? No. Impatient. Yeah, you're impatient. When you got a short spirit, you're impatient. Okay. So katsar, it means to shorten. So instead of you having this long suffering, you're impatient. Okay. So think about this. How does that apply to us? Yeah, it's true for us. Think about here we are, we're in Egypt, and yet we've become impatient. We want it to happen now. God, you promised this. And so, and ruach is also breath there, but then we get to the hard bondage because why? Their work becomes hard. their work, what they're doing for Yah becomes very hard. And that word, cachet also means stiff neck. So, which is interesting because when you look at what that's talking about, it's not really also talking about, oh, their neck stiff, which I do have a stiff neck, but it is their attitude of their heart. It is part of being, if they're stiff necked, they have this attitude, well, I'm not going to do it, they're stubborn. Yeah. And so, when you think about those meanings and you put that back into that verse and look at what it's saying, as Moshe spoke these words to the children of Israel, but they did not hear and obey Moshe because they were impatient. And they had this attitude of stubbornness and stiff neck in their heart about their service, about their work. And so the children of Israel were living in Goshen, which was a land of plenty, and this is also talking about, well, wait a minute, they're living in a place that's a land of plenty, but yet their service to the Egyptians was hard, but they were stiff-necked about leaving it. It's not that they were just stiff-necked, as they didn't want to leave it. Why? Because they were still in the land of plenty. Okay. Mixed multitude, yeah, that came out of the Exodus. Mm-hmm.
You wonder sometimes, okay, when they made the golden calf and all, before that, though, they said, we was in hard bondage, but was that only the Israelites? Because they talk about, we had plenty of food and water and all that.
Yeah.
Was that the other part that was not in bondage that came out with them?
Part of it, yeah. I mean, she was just talking about what about the mixed multitude that came out, where, even when we see later on that when they're, complaining to Moses and they do the golden calf, they're saying that we were in hard bondage. Well, was it talking about the others or just the Israelites there that were there? Yeah. Well, I think they both missed Egypt, but as far as like the bondage and stuff, I do believe that it was. Well, you got to remember though, too, there was a famine. Well, okay, wait a minute. There was a famine. Well, what happened when we talked about before? What happened to the people with the famine? Well, if you were very poor, you were going to die. So what did you do? You sold yourself. You sold your land first to Pharaoh so that you could have food. And then after you went through all of that food, the famine lasted for 5 more years going on or whatever. And so you're saying, well, I have nothing else to eat. What did you do? Then you didn't have anything else to sell but yourself. So a lot of them, the poorer ones would sell themselves into slavery for the Egypt. So it wasn't just the Israelites there. It was the poorer, people too that were doing that. So yeah. Yeah. Well, some of them did. Yeah, it was some of them that were there. Okay, so Exodus 6, I'm going to skip down to verse 26 and just look at this one. Exodus 6 and 26. These are the Aaron and Moshe to whom Yah said, bring the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt, division by division. Okay, so again, I just said, think about, it was Moshe and Aaron that are the ones that are going to bring him out. And, but the people were stiff-necked. How many have the same attitude today that, well, I don't really want to necessarily follow Yah because of the fact that I still want to hang on to the world. They're hanging on to Yah with one hand, but then they're hanging on to the world with the other. And you're not leaving then. He's telling you're not really leaving Egypt. So.
Well, I know when I grew up, we were taught to work. We didn't complain. We didn't ask why. We didn't want this or that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not going to work unless I have $30 an hour.
Yeah.
I won't work.
Yeah. It's the attitude of people's hearts. Yeah. The attitude of people's hearts.
you know, living or they
Yeah.
just want to get.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I read verse 26. Let's look at verse 27. And who told Pharaoh, king of Egypt, let the people of Israel leave Egypt? These are the same Moshe and Aaron. Compare that to the verse we just read before. The names are in the different order. Okay.
Well.
It says these are Moshe and Aaron, and then, you know, because when we look at first, it says, you know, this is Aaron and Moshe, but then in verse 27, it says this is Moshe and Aaron, which is unusual because they're mirror, yeah, well, and they're mirror images. Why didn't he say, you know, usually if you're going to say, oh, this is Eddie and Lisa, then you're going to say this is Eddie and Lisa. You're not going to then say, oh, this is Eddie and Lisa. Oh, this is Lisa and Eddie. You're not going to switch the order, you know, most of the time. But what's interesting when you look at those two verses in the Hebrew, and let me see if I can do this. I'm going to share it so you guys can see on the screen. Those that are here, I will show you later. Let me see, sorry. Okay. I'm going to share. I got to get my screen bigger in order to do that. Share my screen. Okay, can y'all see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So this verse I actually have written in the Hebrew, and I've got it color coded in two different colors. Okay. I did it in the green and in the yellow. Okay. So when you look at this verse, Aharon ve'Moshe, okay, this is Aaron and Moshe. But then you look at the bottom here, who Moshe ve'Aaron is there. Okay. So these are like bookends. Okay. They're pointing to something else. Okay. And what's interesting is I started looking at these verses, and when you look at the verses, what is actually in the green that I've highlighted in the green here are what is in the same in those two verses. Okay. So just for example, I'll just point out here, you got Mitzrayim here, you got Mitzrayim there. Okay. So they're the same. So I looked for the words in Hebrew that were the same, and I put them all the same color because there's a bookends. Well, that means they're pointing at something. They're both pointing to what's different. Yeah. This is right. There is one. So, okay. But what is they pointing to is got to be what's different. Okay. So what's in the middle? So when you start looking at that, what is actually in the middle here, or what is different, is highlighted in the yellow. Okay. So that's what I actually put there, so just so you can see what it looks like. So I'm going to go back out because I need my screen a little bigger. So that's why I had to take that back off. And I'll show you. I'll show it to you too. But when you look at this, they're pointing to the same. So what that is in yellow, I wanted to make sure I got my screen big so I can read it because I can't read it without the vowel pointings. It says Asher Amar Yud He Vav He Lahim Al Zivatom Him Hamedaberim El Paro Melech Lehotze. Okay. So those are the words that are different. Okay. So you've got these bookends. Well, bookends are the same. They're pointing to something. So the words that are all the same are pointing to something else. What's different is here in the middle. And it's Asher Amer, Yud He Vav He, Lahim Al Zivatam Him Hamedaberim. Ooh, that's hard to say. Hamedaberim El Paro Melech Lahotze Mem. Okay. So when you translate that, it actually is saying that Yah said to their armies, they are the ones that speak to Pharaoh, king, to take out water. Okay. That sounds a little weird just because of the way it's worded in English. But what it's saying is, this is Moshe, this is Aaron and Moshe. This is Moshe and Aaron. Okay, these are the bookends. And what's in the middle is, this is what Yah said to the armies, that they are the ones that are speaking to Pharaoh, the king, to take out water. Okay, well, what are Moshe and Aaron? The two witnesses of Yah to the king, Pharaoh. Okay, well, think about, well, wait a minute. What do the two witnesses in the end times, what are they able to do? Let's go to Revelation chapter 11. In Revelation chapter 11 and verse 3, Revelation 11:3. Also, I will give my power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, dressed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two menorahs standing before the Lord of the earth. If anyone tries to do them harm, fire comes out of their mouth and consumes their enemies. Yes, if anyone tries to harm them, this is how he must die. So what were they speaking out of their mouth? The word of Yah. Well, what is the word of Yah likened to? A fire, okay? And it says in verse 6, they have the authority to do what? Shut up the sky so that no rain falls during the period of their prophesying. Also, they have the authority to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. Okay, so think about it. Wait a minute. What were Moshe and Aaron going to do? They were going before the king of the earth, and they were going to speak this word that was going to come out as fire out of their mouth. And they had the power to shut up water, just like, and so when we look at these two verses, they've got, this is Moshe and Aaron, this is Aaron and Moshe, and in the middle, what words were not the same? It's saying that Yah's saying that these are the two witnesses that are going to have the power to shut up the heavens. And he's prophesied it in Exodus, but it's also in Revelation. And they were going to be able to do the plagues. Yes. And then remember I said that had that mem there at the end of it? Well, the letter mem is a picture of the water, because the water is like the sea. And so think about, the witnesses were going to take the water away from those who didn't follow Yah. So Yah was revealing himself and the future. Yeah. But even to think about, even in Exodus, we think, a lot of times that we have to have the end of the book in order to tell us what happens at the end. But we go to Genesis and remember what it says. Even in Isaiah, he says, I let the end known from the beginning known from the, let me go to that verse because.
Well, yeah, and the word says if you want to know Revelation,
you got to
go to the beginning, not the end.
Yeah, so it's Isaiah 46:10. I can't look up my verse. Eddie, can you look it up? Eddie, can you look it up, because I can't.
What is it?
I can't search
What
on
you need?
Isaiah 4. Okay, wait a minute. Here you go.
Isaiah what?
46. I'm pretty sure it's verse 10, if I remember right. I can't, for some reason, my Bible works. It's not letting me search.
46.
Is that the verse? Yes, that's the verse.
That's it.
Yeah, at the end.
Don't say my counsel shall stand. No, places I will do.
At the beginning, I announced the end. So if you want to know what's going to happen at the end times, you go back to the beginning. What's the beginning? Genesis. This is telling the story. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, he was actually telling. What? Right. Well, and he's also a picture of like what's going to happen in the end times, where you're going to have two witnesses who are going to be able to do the exact same thing that Moshe and Aaron did.
If you listen, when somebody asks you, what's going to happen in the end times? What's y'all going to do? Everybody says, go to Revelation.
Right.
But the word says, even though it gives you, John sees these futuristic things, he said, you really want to understand it, go back to Rashid.
Yeah.
Go back to the beginning in Genesis, and there you will
Start from the
see.
beginning. Yeah, start in the beginning.
There you will see.
Okay. So as we go through Exodus, I'm going to go over to chapter 7, and I'm just going to skip down, because I said we were going to go through. Most of us have read this. So 7 verse 5, he says, "Then I will stretch out my hand over Egypt, Mizraim, and bring the people of Israel out from among them, and the Egyptians will know that I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh." So again, what I'm saying here is that Yah is expressing himself. He's revealing himself, but he's not only revealing it to the children of Israel, he's showing everybody who he is. Okay. In verse 6, "And Moshe and Aaron did exactly what Yah had ordered them to do. Moshe was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. And Yah said to Moshe and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, tell Aaron he is to take his staff and throw it down in front of Pharaoh so that it can become a snake. And Moshe and Aaron went into Pharaoh and did this. As Pharaoh had ordered, Aaron threw down his staff in front of Pharaoh and his servants, and it turned into a snake. But Pharaoh in turn called for the sages and sorcerers, and they too, the magicians of Egypt, did the same thing, making use of their arts. Each one threw down his staff, and they turned into snakes. But her own staff swallowed theirs up.
And
So
the Egyptians were known for black magic.
yeah, they were known for that.
Where did they get that from?
Mhm.
They got that from the evil one.
Right. Think about too, well, wait a minute. Here it is. If we're putting this parallel with the end times and the two witnesses being able to do these wonders of Yah, but they're going to be copied by the magicians of the world. They're going to be able to, do the same thing. They're going to, have these signs or wonders, and they're going to be able to do the exact same thing. And
because you got to be able to discern.
Yeah.
In the end times, is what it's saying. Somebody can, so to speak, throw down the stick and make it into a snake, whether that's God or whether that's Satan. May his name be blotted out forever.
Mhm.
You got to know, because a lot of times you'll get in front of people and they'll do this miracle and they'll say, "Oh, that's God. That's, Lord, look at these miracles." But it says many will come in my name saying, "Lord, Lord," and doing miracles done. But I'm going to say, I never knew you. Right? So, boy, discernment has to be some of the in forefront of what we do. It just has
and to
be.
know that it was turning into a snake. Well, the Egyptians, when you think about the Pharaoh, and on the helmet or whatever you call that, he had that cobra, that snake, and that's it was something that represented him being the God of the part of being God of the Nile. In verse 13. It says, nevertheless, Pharaoh was made hard-hearted, and he did not listen to them as Yah said that would happen. So when we think about, here, this was a Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph, and this Pharaoh, is probably trying to show Israel that, he's stronger than them. But notice it says that Yah hardened his heart. But that's not what it says in Hebrew.
Oh, it did?
It doesn't say.
Oh.
It says Yah Hazak strengthened his heart.
To be strong in his own way.
Okay, well, look, what does it say in Luke chapter 6, verse 45? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Luke 6.
I don't know.
No, hopefully I can get there so you can. Luke chapter 6, and you should know this one because you say it to me sometimes.
I know now.
You know what I'm going to say. The good person produces good things from the store of their heart, while the evil person produces evil things from the store of his heart. For his mouth speaks what overflows from his heart. Okay, so out of your mouth speaks what's flowing in your heart. So when you think about what Yah is saying, he's strengthening Pharaoh's heart. Well, it wasn't that he's hardening it, but he's strengthening it to reveal what's in Pharaoh's heart.
Well, even in verse 44, it says, for every tree is known by its fruit.
Yeah.
So whatever you are, you know, that's what your fruit's gonna bear. That's what it's gonna show.
So in other words, to think about, well, wait a minute, when things are coming against you and you are angry or whatever, what's coming out of your mouth, that's really the type of person you are.
When the pressure comes.
And when the pressure comes, that's really revealing what kind of, we are.
Even if you don't think it, you're doing it.
Yeah, so,
And that-
You know,
I mean, now think about that. That
that's
really,
why it takes discipline.
yeah,
Because if we don't have discipline in the Lord, we could say anything, do anything.
Yeah.
When we get mad, like Terry says, when pressure comes on us, a lot of times that decides, are we going to use those words we shouldn't use? Are we going to do that thing to our brother and sister that we shouldn't do? Sometimes Paul said he did that,
Yeah.
but he had more discipline, that he did a lot more right than he did wrong, and made sure he had the discipline to, sometimes when that happened, you stand still when you can't do anything.
okay,
know.
so,
Been studying some more.
the gateway to the heart, yeah, the eyes are,
It goes into your mind first.
yeah.
Then your mind, if you
Let
let
it
it
do-
keep
dwell
going,
on it, yeah, it's
starts
gonna-
breaking
yeah.
down,
So it'll get into your heart, yep.
and then
So,
sometimes you know how Satan play with you sometimes. And
yeah, she was just talking about how
I
the
want
eyes
to-
are the gateways to your heart. So if you, whatever you're looking at or stuff,
That's
that one of the things that's coming into you, then, if you're starting to think about it, you're dwelling on it. And then if you keep dwelling on it, then it becomes a part of you and it gets into your heart. So, okay. So as we get into the plagues now, Yah is using these plagues to wake up the people. And each one of the plagues is addressing one of the different gods of Egypt. And we think about today, well, it might not be lice and frogs, or cows that we worship, but we do have these idols in our life. And so I first want to do an overview of the plagues because I think this links here. Okay, just to go through the 10 plagues. We have the blood, which in Hebrew is dam, which numerically is 44. Frogs, which are Sephardim. Sephardim numerically is 494. And then we have the lice or gnats, depending on which translation can name, which is 120. And then we have the beast, Arov, which is 278. The pestilence, which is Dever, which is 206. Boils, Shakim, which is 368. I figured that would be your worst 180. The hail, Barad, which is 206. The locust, Arbe, which is 328. I'm sorry, locust or 208. Sorry, 208. And then Hoshek, which is darkness, is 328. And then Bakor, which is the firstborn, dying, is 228. And so when you look at these plagues, these 10 plagues, and, when you look at their numerical value, the numerical value for all of them is 2,480, which is interesting in itself because that is, 10 times 248. And 248 is the numerical value of Abraham. And Abraham was the 10th generation from Noah. And so we got 248 times 10 here. And, they believe it's taught that the world was created due to the merit of Abraham, because in Genesis 2 and 4, where it says, these are the history, the toldo of the heavens and the earth, when they were created, that word when they were created is Behabarim, which is actually the same letters as in Abraham. It's just they're in a different order. And so that's why they're looking at, when you're talking about the heavens and the earth being created, that it was all in reference to Abraham. And it was, it was through the descendants of Abraham that the children of Israel were going to receive the word. So, and what's also interesting, because, these 10 plagues add up to be 2,480. Well, when we look at what was Abraham given, the word. Well, what was the word of Yah? It was Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Devarim. And when you look at those words in Hebrew, their numerical values are: Bereshit is 913. Exodus, Shemot, is 746. Vayikra is 317. And then Bamidbar is 248, and Devarim is 256. And so their total value is 2,480. So the 10 plagues are going against those that the children of Israel, or the children of Abraham, who are against the children of Abraham, who did what? Who received the 10 words, or the commands of Yah, the 10, the commandments. When we look at Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Torah, when we see that these are actually the same number, that it's the 10 plagues are coming against those that are against the children of Abraham, who did what? Who received these books. So now, when we go through these plagues, they actually fall into 3 different groups. Okay. The first group is the groups that were announced by the river. Okay. And the first plague, the 4th plague, and the 7th plague are all announced by the river. We see that there are some that are announced in the palace before Pharaoh. The 2nd plague, the 5th plague, and the 8th plague are all announced in the palace. And then we got the ones that are unannounced. We've got the 3rd plague, the 6th plague, and the 9th plague that he didn't tell them it was coming. He just did it. So at least part of the plagues he announced, but then the 3rd, 6th, and the 9th, he didn't tell them. They just happened. So like I said, as we go through these plagues, we're going to look at the different gods and how they apply. So let's go to Exodus 7, and I'm going to start in verse 17. Okay, so Exodus 7, verse 17. So Yah says, "This will let you know that I'm Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I will take the staff in my hand and strike the water in the river, and it will be turned into blood. And the fish in the river will die, and the river will stink, and the Egyptians won't want to drink water from the river." And Yah said to Moshe, "Say to Aaron, take your staff, reach out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the rivers, the canals, the ponds, and the reservoirs, so that they can turn into blood. Then there will be blood throughout the whole land of Egypt, even in the wooden buckets and the stone jars." And Moshe and Aaron did exactly what Yah had ordered, and he raised his staff in hand in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants, struck the water in the river, and all the water in the river was turned to blood. So, so again, here it is. The first one, is basically turning the water into blood. And, like I said, think about too, the children of Israel living there. Where do they get their water? Okay. This is coming upon them too. So, there are some of the plagues that are affecting both the Israelites and the Egyptians. They were getting affected by this. Their water, just like, their water is turning to blood. And you think about, well, where does judgment start? In the house of Yah. So again, they're going to be, it is trying to prove to not only, like I said, the children of Israel, but to everyone who Yah is. So they're going to come under some of these judgments too. Okay. And if we think about, well, this first plague of the water to blood parallels that we see in Revelation. So let's go over to Revelation. Revelation chapter 8. I'm going to go to that one first. In verse 8. So Revelation 8:8. And the second angel sounded his shofar, and what looked like an enormous blazing mountain was hurled into the sea, and a third of the sea turned into blood. Okay. Yep, that's a third of. Okay, go over to chapter 16. Okay, chapter 16 in Revelation, verse 3. And the second one poured out his bowl into the sea, and it became like the blood of a dead person, and every living thing in the sea died.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same picture of what was happening in Egypt. So this blood, we know is a symbol of life and atonement. And now the blood is actually becoming something that's deadly. It's something in their water, it's a deadly substance. So, does that mean that we're going to see, in these last days, the water turn into blood? Not necessarily, because, I think, Revelation is a vision, and visions don't necessarily play out in the same way. A lot of times it is imagery, but, we've seen,
Yeah, even though, I mean, you got John, from his perspective, thousands of years ago, he was seeing something intelligent in the way his mind would see it.
right,
It would be different what we would see today.
right.
So it's, you kind of got to read in between the lines a little bit there. So.
Yeah, and there are instances, don't know if y'all look, but there are different bacteria and algae that can form depending on the rain cycles or whatever, that actually can turn the water into a red color that it looks like blood, and it kills out certain species there too. And so that we do see that. We have seen that happen in recent years. That red algae, we've seen that happen. But we do know that this Yah tells us that in this word that these are focused toward the gods of Egypt. And there were a multitude of gods that Egyptians worship. And, think about, they often overlap the areas of their rule when we think about these gods. And so when we think about here, this was, he's specifically doing this to the Nile. Well, this plague is directed toward the gods of the Nile. Well, it wasn't just one god of the Nile. Osiris was the god of the dead. And it was said that his brother Seth killed him and cut him into pieces and threw him in the river. And that the annual flooding of the Nile is associated with his death and resurrection. And that, think about this too, that we know that Pharaoh is seen as the god of the Nile. And that, tying that to the imagery of that's given here, that thinking about, they're looking at even in ancient Egypt, they thought of the Nile as the life giver. That's where they got their food from. That's where they got their water from. That's where they, were able to grow their crops because of the flooding of the Nile. So it was thought of as being a life giver. So the life of the nation was based on this Nile. And, think about, that's for their children and being able to have more. Well, it's interesting then to think about, well, what just happened right before this? When we're reading in Exodus, what else happened in the Nile? Remember what happened with Moses? They were going to throw him in the Nile because the Pharaoh at that time said, you're going to throw these male babies in the Nile. So the Nile became the grave for these Hebrew infants. And so they were dying in the Nile. Their blood was crying out from the Nile. Wow. And so Yah is actually using what Pharaoh, the other Pharaoh, had done, talking about and turned it into a plague and addressing their God. And so think about the plague of blood today. And I just Googled and looked up in 2024. Of course, all of the records are not there, but in 2024, there are at least 615,911 abortions, excluding California, New Hampshire, and Maryland, because they either didn't report theirs or they didn't meet the standards. But I do. So I do have the link in there that you can see the report. And this, the report is from the World Population Review, and they rank them by state. And you can actually, you can act in this under report, but you can go in there and look and see, where the different states fall to. But I also put in, so I'll put that in the link too. And, whether or not, you've had an abortion or not, your taxes go to fund them. While the federal government states that they don't pay for abortions, Planned Parenthood pays for it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, wait a minute. Where does Planned Parenthood get their money? 43% of their money comes from the government. It's taken, and you have no control. So no matter how much we want to come out of her, we still have a part of her in us. And not only that, but think about this. Where do the abortions happen? In the womb. Okay. Well, what is the womb made of? What's in there? Fluid, water. It's a water-filled space. So think about what's happening when you're having those abortions. The water is turning to blood. You're killing that baby. That water life becomes death there. And so, that's just one of them. So that's what I'm saying. Think about how this applies to our life. We don't have control over it here. We're taking part in it.
One thing about abortions is the population as a whole, they don't really understand what abortion really is. They just think, because I watched on YouTube one day, and I think it was Charlie Kirk. If anybody knows him, he's, a YouTuber, but he's a conservative like us, totally against abortion. He was going on college campuses, and he actually had pictures of the procedure of what happened. He'd go around and ask the, guys and girls, do they believe in abortion? And just about 9 out of 10, everyone that he went to said, oh, yes, absolutely. He says, do you have the courage to let me show you one on here, what they do? And so, yeah, sure. And where they go up in the forces and just cut that baby into pieces. And every one of them said, I had no idea in this world that that's what they did, that that's actually what happens. So a lot of times it needs to be educated. First of all, they need to go to the word. It's wrong. They shall not murder, because that's what they're doing. They're murdering, and see that and be educated to understand what these people do. You think 1 minute, if the doctors were subsidized by the government to just make a little bit off an abortion, that they would do it? No. You know why? Because now they're making millions of dollars. It's all about abortion to the doctor is all about money and nothing else.
So it's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
they do. Yeah, that's true. She was just saying that about the doctors take the Hippocratic oath, but yet, a lot of them still do that. So, okay. Yeah. A lot of them don't. Yeah. Okay. So, Exodus chapter 8. I'm going to go to verse 1. Depending on your version, it may be verse 5. Exodus 8:1, but depending on your version, it may be verse 5. Okay. Yah says to Moshe, say to Aaron, reach out your hand and your staff over the rivers, canals, and ponds, and cause frogs to come up out of the land of Egypt. And Aaron put out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same with their secret arts and brought up frogs out of the land onto Egypt. So here we get another plague, okay? And Heket, or Hek, depending on how you pronounce it, was a frog-headed goddess and of Egypt, and they Heket personified generation or birth or fertility. And we think about a lot of these ancient religions and stuff, or even a lot of cults have a sexual slant to what they believe. Because think about the frogs. Frogs multiply and covered everything. And when you look at Heket, or Hek, depending on, this sexual immorality is so pervasive that it dominates everything around us. So think about what this is happening. These frogs are coming out and they're going everywhere. It even mentions them going into their bedrooms here. Okay, so when you start going through, okay. And you think about here with, our society, it's so, the sexual aspect is so pervasive in everything around us, TV, internet, magazines. It's plagued with, these sexual sins and sins, even thinking about abortion is related to this sin. Okay.
The pornography.
Yeah, the pornography.
So
yeah.
I could get my phone right now and all I gotta do is type in porn and it comes up all manner. And, and you think it's not as far as the kids of this world, the kids, listen, Lisa, I know probably 5-6 years ago, we had somebody that come into the ministry and one of their kids came with him. He was between 10 and 12. Well, he kept staying in the bathroom and we found out he was in the bathroom while we were having Torah class watching porn. And it just shows you how it's very, very out here. It's very addictive. And listen, I don't care. There's 4 of us men in here right now. I don't care how holy we think we are, if we let ourselves and allow ourselves to look at things, it will get a hold of us and overpower, because it's the strongest sexual sin there is in this world. And it's everywhere, everywhere.
Well, and the Hebrew word for frog is actually Zephardi, and it is written in the singular here. And what's interesting is if you go to the next verse there, it's written in the plural. So it said, well, yeah. Well, it says in verse 1, 8:1, or depending on 8:5, it talks about that, you're going to stretch out your hand and, and the Zephardi would come up upon the land. But then it says it in the plural. Okay. So when you think about what's happening here, it sounds a little weird, because how is this one? And then all of a sudden they're becoming many. And that, what's interesting, there's a midrash on it that actually says that there was one huge frog that actually came up out of the river, and that it opened its mouth and spewed forth legions of smaller frogs, which sounds a little odd until we go to Revelation. Okay, let's go to Revelation chapter 16. And remember how this parallels, because I was like, this is, Revelation chapter 16. And we're going to go down to verse 13.
The first I heard about frogs was years ago on National Geographic, and they thought that could reproduce themselves without a mate.
Okay.
And that goes with transgender names.
I saw 3 unclean spirits that look like frogs come from the mouth of the dragon, and from the mouth of the beast, and from the mouth of the false prophet. Okay. And they are miracle working demonic spirits which go out to the kings of the whole inhabited world to assemble them for the war of the great day of Yahzebaot. And so when we look at this, you've got here this frog, coming out of the mouth of the dragon. And so think about these, perhaps these demonic spirits are being compared to the frogs because their power is going to cover the earth as the frogs came out and covered the whole land of Egypt. And, when you look up Sephardi, not only does it mean frog in Hebrew, but it also means small, which is interesting because, what was it a few years ago about draining the swamp was Trump's slogan. Maybe that takes on a new meaning now, thinking about okay. But, like I said, most agree that this plague was actually, targeting the goddess Ket, and, which was the goddess of birthing, which sounds similar, but these, frogs are coming out. And when you look at pictures of the Ket, she's often pictured as a woman, but she's got the head of a frog. And well, that's what I'm getting ready to go to. Yeah, because what's interesting about this goddess is that Heket would choose which the child's gender, emphasizing which one would live. So she represented matriarchal society where actually males were emasculated and diminished. Well, think about what's happening in our world today. It used to be, well, if you were a real man, you didn't act like a woman. He wasn't necessarily emotional. He was the one who knew hard work and he provided for his family. Men aren't supposed to be women. They're not supposed to be like, but we also see there's a big push in gender roles, and we now see, schools are transitioning children without their parents' permission. Yeah. And in some cases, they're even telling teachers and counselors and stuff to lie to the parents because they want to protect that child's chosen gender or whatever. But not only
the child knows what he wants to. That's why you have to have the parent be the head, not the children be the head.
So
they don't understand the
child.
Well, they don't know.
Not only that, but Heket was anthropomorphic, which means she had human traits and animal, not necessarily or non-human traits. So she was sort of like a hybrid of sorts, not like hybrid cars, but more like AI. And so, so think about these two plagues. These first two plagues are featuring these gods. And, when think about, when you look at Heket, not only is this targeting Heket, but Heket and Osiris are both worshipped in the city in Egypt called Abydos. Yeah. And Abydos, when you look at in Hebrew, has at its root Abad, which is where we get the Hebrew word for Abaddon, which is in Revelation chapter 9, verse 11. What it says in Revelation 9:11, they have a king and the angel over the abyss, and whose name in Hebrew was Abaddon. But his name in Greek was called Apollyon. And so you think about Heket was one who wanted to usurp men's role in the earth. They wanted, to have very effeminate men or emasculated men, and because it was a very matriarchal society, and the women's role was also corrupt because then she really couldn't produce, And so, it's interesting that it's, linked with verse 9:11. Is there? That's interesting. Don't know. Okay, so let's go back to Exodus chapter 8.
What was the first one that Pharaoh didn't have it?
No, they could replicate the frogs. Yeah, they did the frogs and the blood. Okay, verse 16. 8:16, depending on your version, it may be verse 12. Okay, and Yah said to Moshe, Say to Aaron, reach out your staff and strike the dust of the ground. It will become lice or gnats throughout all of the land of Egypt. Then they did it. And Aaron reached out his hand and his staff and struck the dust on the ground. And there were lice on the people, the animals, and all the dust on the ground became lice throughout the whole land of Egypt. And the magicians tried with their secret arts to produce lice, but they couldn't. There were lice on the people and on the animals. So here is the one that we see. You know, we've got this lice, or, you know, depending on which version you're reading, it's called gnats too. In Hebrew, it's kanim. But this is basically targeting the earth god Geb and Seb. And what's interesting with these gods is their priests were all about these special garments that they would wear. And they cleansed themselves twice a day. They were concerned about this outward appearance, how they would appear. And they were considered special, and they had special privileges and even special housing. And think about, they were, these were the earth gods here. And so think about, for us, how this applies to us. You know, we fall into a similar trap. We often get very carnal and earthly minded and worry more about what's our outward look, is going on, whether it's our wealth or the house we live in, the car we drive, our education, our reputation, more than we're concerned about what's in our heart. And when we think about Geb was the god of the earth. And Geb was usually associated with a goose or a serpent.
Is it D-E-B?
Geb, G-E-B.
Oh.
And earth is often depicted as what? Mother Earth. And in many ancient civilizations, the earth god is actually a female. But Geb was considered to be bisexual. And in his shrine in Bata in Inu, it said that he laid a great egg, symbolizing his rebirth and renewal, from which the sun god arose in the form of a phoenix or Babin. And since, Geb is also associated with many other animals, he's also linked with healing. It said that he had the power to heal scorpion stings, which is interesting because that's linked with another plague of the locust. But this is the one that we see that the magicians or the sorcerers could not copy. And, there's lots of thoughts on why they couldn't copy it. But when I look at the Hebrew for it, it's the word kanim is plural, kin singular. It's written kaf nun, and it's from the root kanan, which means root or support. And it's only used one time in scripture. It's actually used in Psalms chapter 80 in verse 15. And it says this, let me go, Psalms 80. Canaan is K-A-N-A-N. It's Psalms 80 and verse 15. And in this version, it might be verse 16, depending on your Bible. It says, protect what your right hand planted, the son you made strong for yourself. Okay, and so that first word there, veknan, is where that is. Okay, and in my version here in the complete, it's translated as protect. And just looking at what I know here from the root and thinking about the only time that it's used, I think part of it begins here that the magicians can't reproduce this miracle is because it's, not only were they increasing in intensity in his display of his power, but when you look at how it is written in the Hebrew, like I said, it's in the Hebrew, it's Vekana Asher Nata Vayimekha Ve'al Ben Itzmaha Laka. And so translating that and the support that he plants, the right hand, and on the son he made strong for yourself. Well,
So which one is the song?
no, it's the very first one, to support or protect. And so, thinking about the enemy, because the enemy is the one that's giving them the power to be able to replicate these things. He doesn't support and show the strength of the son of the right hand. And when you think about what this verse is saying in the Hebrew, and it's saying, and the support that he plants, the right hand in the son, he has made strong for himself. That's basically what that verse is saying in the Hebrew. Well, the enemy is not going to strengthen or show support for the son of the right hand, Yeshua. And so in Hebrew, I think Yah is revealing that it's his right hand, the son, Yeshua, that is the support for us. And that this is where, he begins to show the difference with this third plague. That, the Egyptians, where it says that, that their magicians could not replicate this one. And if we go back to Exodus 8 in verse 19, it depends on your version again. If you are in some Bibles, it may be verse 15. It says, the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh was made hard-hearted so that he didn't listen to them, just as Yah had said that would happen. And so, think about, I think it's interesting that the magician said, this is the finger of God. They recognize that it's different. And, in Hebrew, it's Esabah, Elohim. And when it's interesting, when you look that phrase, finger of God, is used 2 other times in the Torah. It's used in Exodus 31 and 18. And in Deuteronomy 9 and 10, and they're both talking about the Torah being written with the finger of God. And so both of those references are about, Yah touching something directly. And this got me to thinking again about the plagues. Well, there are 10 plagues. Yah's touching these plagues directly, but there's also the 10 commandments, or the 10 words. Is there a link between the 10 and the 10? I think so. I'm not exactly sure of what it is, but this is just the thought that I had, that just the plagues are showing the consequences of the ones who has the perverted soul. The 10 words are the commands that are showing us how to restore that soul. Mm-hmm. Because the plagues are coming upon those that are basically, perverted their souls, and then, but how they rectify it is by going back to his word, by doing his commands. So, but
The blood, the frogs, and the lice,
all
also 3 of those, the Israelites suffered
as well. Yes, you're right. He was just saying that all 3 of those, the blood, the frogs, and the lice, all of them suffered, the Egyptians and the Israelites. And you think about, well, what happens after he judges his house? Then we see a distinction. So if we keep going in Exodus 8, go to the next verse. Well, let's see. It might be verse 20. Yeah, go down to verse 20, depending on which version you are reading. Some versions, it may be verse 16. And well, I'm just going to start. Yah says to Moshe, get up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh when he goes out to the water, and say to him, here is what Yah says. Let my people go so that they can come and worship me. Otherwise, if you won't let my people go, then I will send swarms of insects on you, your servants and your people, and into your houses. The houses of the Egyptians will be full of swarms of insects, and likewise the ground they stand on. But I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people live. No swarms of insects will be there, so that you can realize that I am right here in the land. Yes, I will distinguish between my people and your people, and this will be the sign that will happen by tomorrow.
So basically, God, y'all know this want his people to feel what he was doing to the Egyptians because of their pagan thing. And then, once he
The
showed
judgment,
mercy on
yes.
and said, okay. I
Yeah,
won't
she
let
was just
them
saying that,
have
yeah,
any
just
more
as
than
Yah let the Israelites suffer
So
these
he was
first
trying to
three.
show
Yeah, he was showing that he's revealing them. They lived there. They lived through that part, but then now we have the separation. Yeah.
How did the people come to the wall?
Yeah.
Did the Israelites, they had to go through the first phase, right?
Yeah. Yeah. This is where there's separation comes. And so when we see these swarms here, it's actually, I don't know, that it's really a swarm. We're not really told specifically what insect it is. A lot of times, they look at it one way, but this one is actually focusing on the god Kefri, which is the insect god, which, is related to the scarab beetle in Egypt. And what's interesting, because you think about what the scarab beetle, but the scarab beetle, Kefri, was also a sun god, a solar deity, due to the fact because the scarab beetle would roll the ball of dung. Okay, would roll the ball of dung. Well, they connected that. Well, wait a minute, that looks like the sky. And so this is, the sun, and that this sun is moving across the sky. So they related to that. So Kefri was a solar deity, because they saw this scarab beetle rolling things across. And so they were saying that, oh, he's moving the sun across the sky. And so Kefri is also related to the stars and constellations. And, think about too, the Egyptians, they had this same, infatuation with the stars and the zodiacal signs. And then, we see the perversion with the horoscopes and all of that. But, if you even look at how, the pyramids were built and how they line up with certain stars and solar alignments, really whatever. But, all of that was done thousands of years ago. Okay, so let's keep going. Exodus chapter 9 and verse 1. And then Yah said to Moshe, go to Pharaoh and tell him, here is what Yah, the Elohim of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go so that they can worship me. If you refuse to let them go and persist in holding on to them, the hand of Yah is on your livestock in the fields, on the horses, the donkeys, the camels, the cattle, the flocks, and he will make them suffer a devastating disease. So again, we've got here, this one is, where the animals are going to be affected. This is focusing on specifically the cows, the cow god. And there's actually two main gods in the Egyptian religion. One is male, one's female. And we have Apis and Hathor. And cow gods were worshipped in different ways because Apis was thought to have the power of prophecy and be able to look into the future and tell what things were going to happen. Well, remember, Yeshua tells us, don't worry about the future, especially, not to be concerned about, for tomorrow will take care of itself. And you think about, even in the Torah, in Deuteronomy 18, he tells us, don't talk to those people that are looking into the future, the ones who forecast or cast spells or talk to ghosts or familiar spirits or dead ones, or, don't be associated with them. Yeah, you see it on TV all the time. Well, exactly. And so what do you see? Yeah. Well, you think about, that's exactly what, this guy was thinking.
Ghost.
And, and we're to be concerned about today and the work at hand. We're not to consult with those who predict the future. Okay. And then if we keep going, in Exodus 9, oops, oh goodness, sorry. I hit the wrong button there. Okay, Exodus chapter 9, and I'm going to go down to verse 8. It just depends on the version that well, I think it's 8. Yep, it's the same. And Yah said to Moshe and Aaron, take handfuls of ashes from the kiln and let Moshe throw them in the air before Pharaoh's eyes. and they will turn into fine dust over all the land of Egypt and become infected sores on the men and animals throughout Egypt. So they took the ashes from the kiln, stood in front of Pharaoh, and threw them in the air, and they became infected sores on the men and the animals. And the magicians couldn't even stand in Moshe's presence because of the sores, which were on them as well as on the other Egyptians. But Yah made Pharaoh again hard-hearted so that he didn't listen to him, just as Yah said to Moshe. So again, we've got these boils here. And this is targeting the gods of medicine and healing. There were multiple gods of medicine and healing, like Sekhmet, Thoth, and Isis. Those were just three of the gods. And so think about this one is linked really with the mark of the Anti-Messiah. And Revelation 16. Okay, in Revelation chapter 16, gone there a couple of times. And verse 2. Okay, well, I'm going to start in verse 1. And I heard a loud voice from the sanctuary say to the 7 angels, go and pour out on the earth the 7 bowls of God's fury. So the first one went out and poured out his bowl on the earth, and disgusting and painful sores appeared on all the people who had the mark of the beast and worshiped its image. So again, like I said, this one is linked with the mark of the Anti-Messiah. And these, think about these ancient Egyptians. When you start looking at ancient Egypt, they were focused on preserving life, in this world and even in the afterlife. They have the Book of the Dead. And the priests were of these gods of medicines were actually physicians or doctors.
And people around the world, they don't really understand what's going to come upon this earth. What really is going to come at the end time and what they're going to have to deal with. You better have Yah in your heart.
Okay, but think about this. The ancient Egyptians were focused on preserving life in this life, and their priests were the doctors or the physicians. And notice what Moshe did. He was commanded to take the ashes from the furnace and throw them up. And these ashes would, do you know what these ashes actually were? When you start looking at the human sacrifices, these were the children that were sacrificed to these gods. Wow. And so even today, when we think about these physicians, they're using the children that were sacrificed. Well, we talked about what was the first one, about the blood. The aborted children. What are they doing? They're using these aborted babies to help stem cells and help preserve life. And we see these physicians and these pharmaceuticals are also seen in the last days. A lot of people don't realize that they're in there. If we go, let's go to Revelation chapter 18.
In Joseph, when he had Jacob embalmed, he had it embalmed in the Egyptian way.
Yeah.
They take their part and certain parts out and put them in a jar for their afterlife. So what about, all right, if they know Joseph, how did they embalm Jacob?
We don't, yeah. Well, he did it, because of the fact he was buried for a long time. Yeah.
But
it was a 60-day process. Yeah, he went through the process. Yeah.
To do it.
Yeah.
Because they knew the process of cutting.
Yeah, it was a 60-day process of embalming Jacob. Yeah, it says it. Well, the word says that he did Jacob that way. So. But that's different. Yeah, but that's different than what, when you're talking about going through, they're using stuff to worship. I mean, as far as. Yeah. Yeah.
That'll bring them back.
Okay, let's keep going to Revelation 18, verse 23. Well, I'm going to go back to 22. The sound of the harpists and the musicians, the flute players and the trumpeters will never be heard again in you. No work of any trade will ever be again found in you. The sound of the mill will never again be heard in you. The light of the lamp will never again shine in you, and the voice of the bride and the bridegroom will never be heard in you. For your businessmen, this is talking about the fall of Babylon, were the most powerful on the earth. All of the nations were deceived by your magic spell. That's what it says in the English there. But when you look, I'm going to read that last verse in King James. It says, and the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were great men of the earth, for thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Okay. So the great men of the earth here, the businessmen of Babylon, were deceiving the nations by what it says, magic spell or sorceries. But if you look at that word in the Greek, Eddie, what's that word in the Greek right there?
Which one?
Right there. Okay. Can you read it?
Pharmaceuticals.
Pharmakia. Yeah.
Yes, that's what it's talking about.
Pharmakia, which it says
Wow.
in the concordance, the use of administering drugs or poisoning, which is sorcery and magic.
That's all these drugs.
So think about what is happening here in the last days.
Yeah.
It says, this one, that these physicians, this pharmakia is actually the great businessmen in the world in these last days. And they're the most powerful ones that are deceiving the nations. And so how many today are putting their trust in these medicines and in these drugs instead of looking toward the creator? We just went through. Yeah, we just went through one. And now what are they talking about? Oh, now you got to watch out. There's going to be another epidemic. And they already told us years ago it's going to be avian flu. Yeah, they're already getting the vaccine ready. It is going to be the avian flu.
I'm not going to take it. I'll never take it.
So that's, that is something that they're already prepping for. But, it is said these are the great businessmen of these last days are going to be those that are going to be doing that. Okay.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay, so let's keep going. Exodus 9, and I'm going to go down to verse 22. And Yah said to Moshe, reach out your hand toward the sky so that there will be hail in all of the land of Egypt, falling on the people, animals, everything growing in the field throughout the land of Egypt. And Moshe reached out with his staff toward the sky, and Yah sent thunder, hail, and fire ran down to the earth, and Yah caused it to hail on the land of Egypt. It hailed and fire flashed up with the hail. It was terrible, worse than any other hailstorm in all of Egypt since it became a nation. So think about this. This next plague is addressing Isis, Nut, and Horus, the sky gods. And in verse 23, it's interesting that it says Yah sent what Yah sends. The first thing he sends is the thunder. Well, thunder in Hebrew is kol, which is voice. So he was addressing whose voice they should be listening to. And, a lot of times, often in, people's lives, they listen to everybody else's voice. So when you got something going on, what do? You're going to call this buddy. You're going to call that buddy. You're going to call this one. You're going to call that one and get their advice on things instead of going to the word and saying, okay, Yah, or praying and saying, Yah, what is your voice on this? What's your word? But a lot of times that's what, people are doing is they're wanting to go to everybody else because why? These people are going to agree with you, whatever you want to hear. You want to hear. Yeah. And so, like I said earlier, we don't necessarily have the frogs and the cows that we worship, but we do have these idols and these things in our lives. And each one of these plagues not only addresses an ancient Egyptian god, but like I said, they can also be applied to our lives. These idols that we have, and think about just some of the ones here, I point out are self. We're all about, sin is about ourselves. What's, not selflessness, but self. What's, impacting me? Power and control. what is power and control? It's exalting ourselves, beauty. Well, what's beauty about? Exalting ourselves, making ourselves look better, or adorning ourselves. Wealth and greed.
Yeah.
About sustaining ourselves. Yeah. Pharmakia, it's about, the magic of the day, which doesn't really truly heal, but it touches, basically the symptoms, which is about, again, what? Preserving ourselves. Sun worship, it's a day for ourselves instead of being a day set apart. So, when we go through these plagues, there's only one Elohim, one God that's left standing, and it's Yah Elohim, and that the children of Israel and the Egyptians see here. He's revealing himself to both of them. Mm-hmm. And, when we think about the word Egypt, we say Egypt, but Mitzrayim is the word in Hebrew, and Mitzrayim actually has at its root the word zak, which is distress, dire straits. And so, generally, when you think about when you're reading the Bible, it basically is casting the land of Egypt in a very negative light. I'm not saying the Egyptians are bad people or anything like that, but I'm saying that when you look at it in reference to the Bible, and it's about, it's about the oppressor of his people and refusing to give Israel their freedom and liberation. And Egypt wants to control Israel, and they want to put all of these fears, on her, these fears of power. And, Egypt, in the world that we live in, we must set ourselves apart from. Mm-hmm. We must, lose that mentality of being that slave and a slave to this world system, and learn the lessons of these plagues and how to apply them today. And that, on that, yes, there are going to be things that we're going to have to go through, but that doesn't mean that we can't be protected or have our own little, set apart. Yeah.
And it just comes to me the thought about even when they left Egypt, mm-hmm. How that spirit still, they set it right back up, and it has been rampant in the world. And you look at China, Japan, India.
She's just talking about, even though when they left Egypt, they still took a lot of that with them. That mindset was still with them, even when they went.
Mm-hmm. Even when we went to Mexico, you look at all those things, the mind.
Yep. It was.
The demon, the money.
Those spirits are there too.
Haiti.
And she's just talking about how, how those spirits, are everywhere. We can see them, not only just in one nation, just spread all throughout the nations. And, just as we think about these plagues in the last days, it is actually that separation, that redemption that's going to stand between us and the Egyptians. And the plagues, caution us not to conform to the things of this world, not to assimilate, not to embrace the ways of the nations, or not to sin. It, because if we do, it's going to cause us to lose our identity. And, it's basically leading us to spiritual and, a physical destruction. And, so it's a warning for us to let us have ears to hear what his word is saying in these last days. So,
after we, we started feeling the Lord moving us and bringing us into a deeper study with the great root. I went through my house, and where I had traveled to Mexico and everywhere, and where I'd been, I started going to do the blessing of your thing down, of my house, because I realized even though I don't work with them, they're still.
She's just talking about, when she's traveled, that, a lot of things that she picked up in other places, and that she, she really went through and realized that some of those things were actually idols that she had. So, and she had to go get rid of those. So.
That's an idol to some other person to worship,
So if everybody wants to, does anybody have any questions about today's study? Go ahead and let us know if you have a question. If not, we'll just get together and do the blessing over the congregation for the next week that Yeshua would have done in his time, which I'm not Yeshua. not close to it. Somebody want- Unless you want to use, you want to use Kenny's. He won't mind. He won't mind.
You can do Ken's on there. We're gonna
Yeah,
use,
that's fine.
Kenny, we're gonna use you till late.
he's like, just don't get any lice on it, right? Any of the plague of lice on it, don't get any of that on there, or any moles or anything like that. Yeah.
We'll wash it. Yeberekaka Yahaba Birish Mereha Yain Yaha Panava Ileka Behuneka Yesayava Vinameleka Vayishim Leka Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face to shine on you and show you his favor. May Yahweh lift up his face toward you and give you peace. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, Sar Shalom. Amen.
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Remember always, Yah's the only one. He's our only helper. He's the only lifter of our head. He's the only one we can count on. When our friends and family, we can't, sometimes but Yah, he is the helper in times of trouble. Amen. And so we know that at the end times it's going to come there, but we got one that's greater than all. Amen. Y'all have a good week. Be blessed. And if you need us, give us a call. We love y'all.